Sifu is an incredible martial arts game that has scratched many up I just want to kung fu some dudes to death itch, and through all its praise, one description has been consistent: this game is really hard. And well, I don't think that's quite accurate. I mean, yeah, the game isn't easy by any means, and you should expect many failures, but I don't think the game is hard as much as it just doesn't follow standard rules for difficulty progression. There is a classic agreement that most games have with players. The more you play, the better you get, and the easier the game will be. And Sifu sort of follows this, but not really, because the most important factor to improving isn't skill, it's knowledge. If you don't learn how to use the combat mechanics effectively, if you don't learn the level layouts, and most of all, if you don't actively learn specific enemies' animations and correspondingly how to deal with them, you are very likely to fail over and over again, and you won't be able to brute force your way to victory. Sifu just tackles improving at the game differently from what most players are used to in two main ways. Firstly, the game makes you play the way it wants you to, and secondly, the game forces you to learn through failure. So, succumbing to Sifu's will. The game more or less makes you adopt specific playstyles it wants you to use when fighting certain enemies or roughhousing your way through specific encounters. For example, the second boss, the Fighter, aka Sean, is brutal and for many, including myself, a massive impediment. Up until this point, most elites or bosses have glowy limb attacks at the end of their combos, which means to not get hit by them, you need to dodge, as seen when fighting level 1's boss, the Botanist. So when fighting most enemies, you learn to dodge. On top of this, dodging is a classic game mechanic that most players are comfortable with and have beat numerous games relying on. However, if you use this strategy versus the Fighter, then you will just get beat down with a stick over and over again. The 5 quick attacks combined with the distance the stick provides makes it really hard to avoid damage with dodge, and if you do successfully backwards dodge all the attacks, you're too far away to get off any real damage. The solution is to actually stay close, outlast the barrage, then hit Sean while in his grill. Once you know this is how to do the battle, it's still tricky but nowhere near as punishing as before. When I first met Sean, I had a good run, quickly get destroyed, and the whole time I was super frustrated and confused because I didn't understand what I was doing wrong or what I needed to do to win. It wasn't my skill that was an issue, it was my knowledge. So when I got to Kuroki, the boss of the next level, the museum, I tried to use the lessons I had learned from Sean and stay close. This was a nightmare and I got decimated. I left this battle thinking that the second stage especially was impossibly hard. It's not though. It turns out you just need to keep your distance for the first stage, then stand in place while guarding, letting her come to you for stage 2. Once I knew that, the fight actually became pretty easy. Most games don't work like this. Most games allow players to succeed using their preferred playstyle. Often games with skill trees will even facilitate the player's agency, letting them build characters that strengthen their playstyle, letting the player succeed on their terms. And yeah, this game has a skill tree and a second talent tree, which allows for players to have quite a large choice in how their character approaches situations and operates overall. But the strength of enemies and the specificity in their animations and attacks still means to beat them, it's at least highly encouraged you approach the fight in a specific way that the game gets to choose, not the player. The game does aid in your improvement, as you are able to permanently unlock abilities on the talent tree, which is nice. Even so, getting new abilities doesn't come close to aiding you as much as actively learning about the levels and the combat encounters. This isn't a game where a maxed out character can just cakewalk through enemies. If you don't know what to do, you will still get beat down. The second design principle that makes Sifu seem relentlessly brutal is that the game expects you to learn through failure. This isn't unique to Sifu. Lots of games have this. I mean, this is bread and butter game design for platformers, but Sifu is explicitly created in a way that expects you to lose. When you first verse many of the bosses, you will likely lose that run, or at least die a bunch of times. I'm looking at you, Sean. But your early attempts aren't really about trying to win. You're supposed to use those attempts to learn the patterns of the enemy. You're supposed to learn the geography of the room. You're supposed to gather information that will make future runs easier. In my first couple fights against the Botanist, I suffered a litany of deaths, largely because I was too preoccupied with simply trying to do as good good as possible and win. It wasn't until my third fight that I loosened up and actually explored the arena in stage 2, which I found out had a bunch of sticks scattered around the outside, and once equipped with the weapons, the fight became way easier. When I started playing Sifu, I was getting frustrated I kept getting slapped down and that my age was going up. My mentality about each room was to beat it without dying. But this was the wrong approach. What I needed to be focusing on was taking my time to learn what each challenge was and how to best beat it. This would allow me to beat it without dying or even without taking hits in the future. This also means that dying isn't really an issue for the majority of your runs. And all these mentalities are largely unintuitive. Furthermore, you're unlikely to get positive feedback when first changing style to the one asked by the game. When I realized that the guard technique was better than dodging against Sean, it wasn't instantly better. No, I was much worse and unpracticed with that strategy, so the battle was harder and I was dying more. And this might have frightened me to go back to my comfort dodge strategy and made me try to win using a less effective tactic, which I would have eventually done. But I recognized that in order to beat this boss really effectively, I would just have to get on board with the style the game was making me use, while allowing myself to acquire a bunch of fails and deaths practicing the new technique. Once I flipped my approach to the game, it became a lot easier, but also a lot more fun. I wasn't concerned that I was dying a bunch or that I wasn't going through sections super effectively, because every run was really just preparing me for that one ultimate run through that section. This intention from the game is fully on display, as Sifu will save the progress of the best run through a section and allow the player to start all future runs from the lowest age the previous section was cleared. After beating level 1, the squats, at age 40 on my first run, I went back and made sure I beat it at age 20. This allowed me to start the second level, the club, at age 20. Similarly, my first The Club run was completed at age 67, and I brought it down to a solid age 25, and I've done this process with all the levels. I think it's natural to think that each run needs to be the run, the best one yet. But that's not the case. You only ever need to have one of those. The rest of the time, you should really just be learning the combat encounters and practicing how to beat them. You should spend most of your runs exploring, experimenting, and expecting death. And I think we all have the natural inclination to try to make sure the current run goes as good as possible. So allowing yourself to maybe die more times in order to gather more information or to practice a new playstyle isn't intuitive and makes the game feel punishing, when in reality, it's just not rewarding players for the things they're used to being rewarded for. I really love Sifu now, but when I first started playing this game, I was incredibly frustrated. I was annoyed I was dying. I didn't understand why certain enemies were burying me in the ground and making my death counter fly up. However, once I realized that I needed to take the time to learn from these encounters and not prioritize winning, in conjunction with allowing myself to fight the encounter the way the game wanted rather than forcing my own style, the game became way more fun and honestly, not that hard. Well, I mean, the game is still hard, but certainly not the brutal punisher it seemed to be at first. And that's the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my other content. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Time has passed since the days I trained you.